you know, when they interview him, he's a gentleman. He hustles down the line every time he hits the ball.
Yeah.
You've never seen him loaf. He's
And he's well liked.
Yeah.
Players like him a lot.
So-
and hit the slider.
But he's been better. His strikeout
he's been better.
strikeout rate is way down.
But I was surprised that he's humble. He's a nice person.
And he took that well, too.
Now, does he have an opt-out or just Rodriguez?
Oh gosh, I know Rodriguez has an opt-out. I don't remember if Baez has an opt-out or not. I think he does, but I'm not 100% certain.
So, curious, we haven't been together, Danny, in a long. First of all, talk a little bit about you. You know, kind of what's I know you're still at Lakeland, but talk about your position and what you're doing.
So we're still in Lakeland. Joanna and I have been there now for 19 years. And of course, all with the Tigers, and all is well back home. I have sort of began a little while ago, begun the transition to what eventually, God willing, will be retirement in a couple of years. We've changed a lot, the organization. And by that I mean we've grown incredibly. When I started with the Tigers, there were 40 people in my department, player development department. We're at 84 now. And we've invested millions into analytics, performance science, biomechanics. We're undertaking a big capital project right now and turning into one of our batting cage buildings into basically a laboratory. That's ongoing right now. And there's another significant project that's going to begin here within a few months. But I started a transition out of the development aspect of it more into the operations end of it. There are things that I wanted to accomplish before I retire, and the Tigers have been very good about allowing that to happen. That consumes an enormous amount of time for me, and I have less involvement now in the development side of it. We've changed so much. It used to be, I hate to say back in the day, because that makes it sound like it was 30, 40 years ago, but it was actually only 5 to 10 years ago. The Tigers, by and large, were well behind the curve when it came to the integration of analytics. And like it or not, agree with it or not, that's a part of the business. And if you don't embrace it, you're going to be behind. And we were behind. And so a few years ago, our ownership committed significant dollars to upgrading what we had done and to get us into to get us to a point where we were at least in the upper half in the industry and relative to dollars invested, personnel invested, and I think we've got over, 12, 15 people already in our analytics department, and 5, 6, 7 years ago I think we had probably 2 or 3. So we've made this huge investment along with biomechanics and performance science, nutrition. So things have changed a lot, and personnel has changed, leadership has changed, and anytime there's a change in leadership, you can anticipate that there will always be fallout from that. Well, the fallout for me has been good because I didn't lose my job, as others have. That happens. That's expected. I was tied to Al Avila for many, many years, going back to our days with the Marlins, and of course prior to Al, David Dombrowski. So I've managed to survive now 3 significant administration changes And I'm very thankful for that and grateful for that. Tigers have treated me well, and so I can't complain. And it's nice to, there's a part of me that it feels good to know that there isn't going to be baseball after the Tigers for me. This will be it.
They said Philadelphia's awfully nice.
I love Dave, you know that, but when this one is up, that'll be it. And
You got one ready for him with the Tarps comes, don't we?
Yeah, you start tomorrow.
Yeah.
opening day is tomorrow?
No, but you can start tomorrow.
Oh.
Get ready. Opening day's a week away.
Okay, all right. I do care what's going on with the tarp stunks. I do. So
Let me just pause for a second because I see this as kind of you're pausing, you're reflecting on 19 years. So can you pause and reflect on 19 years you've been with the Tigers and 3 separate administrations you've talked about, and they've each had their separate philosophies. Without getting to really the personalities, but you have Dombrowski, Alavila, and now Smith. Can you kind of narrate what maybe their philosophies was and how it is morphed over time?
Dave, a lot of people will say Dave is a traditionalist, and in many ways he is. But Dave is also very smart and understands what's necessary in addition to just having the ability to spend on players, that you have to invest in the analytics as well. And the Phillies are well advanced in that area. But Dave has always had a bent towards traditional scouting, and I'm still a big believer in traditional scouting because with analytics, there is so much information. I mean, the infusion of data is mind-bending, but you have to know what to do with the data. And there are things that the data will tell you that won't tell you, that you can only get through scouting.
Dan, when we got rid of the 2 Castros in Candelario, did analytics play a part in the dismissal of those 3?
Analytics plays a part in everything when it comes to evaluation. It's not the sole measure of how you evaluate, but analytics plays a significant part in player evaluation. When Al took over for Dave, we started to move more towards that direction, although Al, much like Dave, was very much a traditionalist. And Al was a scout himself, so Al would always lean towards a scout's opinion than analytics, but analytics was playing a part. Now with Scott, Scott is very much a forward thinker. He's a young guy, very intelligent, and Scott relies heavily on data and analytics, but Scott also relies on traditional scouting as well. We have and most organizations do anymore, you have a blend of traditional scouting and analytics. But certainly under Scott's leadership, you can see the needle move more towards analytics. You can see that in the dollars invested in analytics. So,
Can I drill down for a second? What's that mean? What does analytics mean? You hear it, and it's sort of that Moneyball type thing somehow. You started that, but you hear the terms like social media. What the hell does it mean? Can you kind of give it some examples?
it used to be many years ago that there was a simplicity to statistical data. You'd measure a hitter by average home runs, RBIs, on-base percentage, slugging percentage. But now there are a multitude of different formulas and algorithms that these young folks are utilizing to evaluate players, different measurements, and it's created a whole different set of statistical categories that front offices use to evaluate players. It's all about data, and there is data being created and invented, if you will, that none of us ever saw 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's challenging. It's challenging for someone like me who's been around the game for over 40 years, who has more of a bent towards simplicity and tradition. The language that is spoken today among the guys in the front offices is starkly different than it was back 15, 20 years ago. To the extent that sometimes, I know for me, I don't always understand the language. It's a different language. And front offices now are filled with, excuse me, young men and women. It's not just young men, it's young men and women. We have, I know the Tigers organization alone, I think we probably have now, oh goodness, at least a half a dozen and probably more women who are working in the front office now on the side of performance science and analytics. So they are playing a very significant role. So it isn't just young men who are moving the game in a different direction.
So how does it play out? You know, you have the general manager. Then you have, in the pecking order of the baseball player side of it, general manager, and then what do you have? What's the order? Is there assistant GM? Is there two assistant GMs? Is there the business side, and then there's the player side?
So in our organization, there is Scott, who is the president of baseball operations, which in essence is the general manager, but that title has changed for those who are in that position. He's the president of baseball operations. And then we have...
Excuse me, I'm introducing to our conversation Denny Lundberg.
Oh, hey, Denny.
Very good, Denny. So we got started pretty late, but you're going to put you right up by Danny so you can hear this.
We just got started. How are you, Denny?
Oh, hi. How you guys doing? Okay. It's not snowing out there, is there?
No snow, but we miss you. Scott's the president of baseball operations, and then we have 3 assistant general managers. Then we have our vice president of player development, who is my immediate boss. That's Ryan Garko. Some of you might remember Ryan. He played for the Indians not too many years ago. We have a new director of scouting, and that basically is the leadership group for the Tigers on the baseball side. And the business side, I don't get involved with on the business side. But we have down in Florida, as we have now for many years since I've been there, we've got player development, we have amateur scouting, international operations, international scouting, and then Lakeland business operations, who they operate the Flying Tigers and the business part of spring training. We all operate out of Lakeland. And so we've got quite a presence in Lakeland as an organization. And that's only going to grow. That's continuing to grow. In fact, we've talked about it during the spring. We have this beautiful $44 million building, And to some extent, we've outgrown it, personnel-wise. We've run out of office space, and we're trying to make accommodations. And so it's amazing how much it's changed in such a relatively short period of time. But that's basically the structure of the organization. We have obviously our pro scouting department. Oh, Scott Bream, I didn't mention Scott Bream. Scott is vice president of player personnel. So you have Scott Harris, then you have Sam, Jay, and Rob are the assistant GMs. Scott Bream is the VP of player personnel. Ryan Garko is the VP of player development. And then you've got our director of scouting. So that's the baseball structure.
Ryan Garko seems to have his finger on the pulse of individual players. I see there are players who, if you look at their stats, they're not performing as the ordinary fan sees it, but Garko sees it a different way.
He's very good at what he does, and I really enjoy working with him, for him. Ryan and I see eye to eye on a lot of things, and it's a very difficult job. In fact, Al said a couple of years ago, and he's absolutely right. He said the hardest job in baseball is the general manager's position. The second hardest job is the guy who is running player development. And he's right. When you're the general manager, you have the major league roster, which you're responsible for, but then you've got the vice president of player development, who has a half a dozen teams that he's responsible for, and he's responsible for the development of those players to help get to the big league team, to help us win. And what makes it more challenging for a VP of player development is that he's not the guy responsible for bringing the talent in. That's the scouting department. So it isn't as though the VP of player development can go out and procure the players that he wants. He has to work with what's been given to him outside of, minor league free agents that will sign during the offseason. And those guys are there basically to supplement the big league team in the event of a need at the major league level. Of course, help the Toledo club to win. But those guys come in and out of your organizations quite frequently.
Dan, in Lakeland, besides our high Lakeland, we have two Latin American teams primarily.
There's two teams in the Dominican Republic. We have one rookie league team in Lakeland. That's in what they now call the Florida Complex League. And then we have the Lakeland Flying Tigers Club, which is low A. Then West Michigan, which is high A, and then Erie and Toledo. And we used to have two rookie league teams in Lakeland in addition to the Flying Tigers, but we cut that back to one. So there are new rules in baseball relative to how many players you can have in your system. There's a cap. You can't have any more than 180 players who are in your system, excluding players who may be on a long-term injured list. So whereas it used to be years ago, you could have as many as you want, that's no longer the case. And that just came about a few years ago.
Danny, how does the analytical and the old way sit in the mind of the players? Is there an effect that, how do these guys get into the position of understanding analytical versus the way they play ball?
Well, a lot of these guys now, they're that generation where they understand the analytics, and they buy into it. Now, they're only going to buy into it if what you're presenting to them is sellable. And our organization has done a really good job of working with the players to buy into the program. And from a developmental standpoint, of course, Ryan Garko drives that train, and he's done an exceptional job in getting players to buy into the programs that we have. But you walk into a minor league clubhouse anymore. In fact, I've been with the Erie Club this week. It used to be at the minor league level, you'd have a couple of cameras, a couple of handheld cameras that pitchers would use to chart from the stands during the game. You walk into a minor league clubhouse now, like we just did a significant renovation over in Erie. You walk into the video room of the Erie Club, and it's a maze of technology and equipment, video screens. It's incredible. I mean, I can only relate it to if you've ever seen on TV what a production room looks like. And I remember back many years ago, the opening of NFL Monday Night Football, they showed an image of the production room, and all it is equipment, technology. It's incredible. And that's what you see when you walk into a minor league clubhouse anymore. You don't see a 1 or 2 camera setup with 1 TV screen and 1 video player. It's a room filled with technological equipment, and the players have bought in. And if they haven't, and I really can't say that there are players who haven't, but if you don't, you're only hurting your own development. And it's not just the data. It's the integration of biomechanics and performance science. I can't begin to explain the things that I've seen that we're utilizing when it comes to biomechanics and performance science and analyzing player movement. It's mind-bending stuff. I mean, the head of our performance science department is a PhD. She's a female. She came from the University of Michigan. She's a very brilliant person. But it's not the traditional baseball guy, the coach or the manager, the instructor who's been around for a number of years. It's people like Georgia, Dr. Giblin, her name is Georgia, who is leading the charge in this area. And it's fascinating stuff. Hard to understand, but it's fascinating stuff.
Dan, are you saying they might focus on a player, and because this player might be doing well or poorly, and be able to analyze why he's doing well or why he's doing poorly, and track that between those two spectrums?
That's exactly what happens. Now, when you're analyzing a player and you're pointing out to the player where his weaknesses are, what he needs to do to improve his skill set, it's not always easy for players to make adjustments, change habits. They're creatures of habit like we all are. But the information that they're getting, the feedback that they're getting from the technology that's being used is so insightful and so impactful that if you are a player and you're not buying into it, you're only hurting yourself. And it will be a detriment to your development. I've seen players respond in ways that we just didn't see many years ago. So it really is good for the developmental side of the game. And the other thing is, when players come into the system from college, more so in college than high school, I would imagine, players are getting accustomed to this technology before they even get to us. So it's incumbent on the organization to make sure that they are staying ahead of the curve, because the last thing you want to have happen is that you have players coming into your system from college or high school and they've already been exposed to this stuff and you're not doing what you should be doing to help improve their game.
And
So
are we gun shy on drafting a pitcher now, or have we said, hey, we've kind of been beat up, and there's guys like Langford there to be drafted? Has that come into the conversation, or we feel that's just bad luck and that's just how it went, and that's the reason Casey Mize and the others are injured?
I think if we had the answer as to why we've had the injury issues that we've had with high-profile players, Casey, of course, Skubal, Manning, Brisky. If we had the answer as to why, we'd all be multimillionaires.
So we don't have an ordered number of players compared to other teams in the pitching area that are injured?
I don't know what other clubs are experiencing specifically. I do know that there has been a rash of injuries over the last couple of years. Our organization alone, I think right now we have 46 or 47, 48 players who are down. And I've not seen something like this in quite a long time.
Does analytics pick that up?
No, not when it comes to player injuries. The analytics provides the data that's used to evaluate players. Biomechanics, performance science plays more of a role in helping to determine whether or not a player may be more injury prone to a certain type of movement, and then what can be done to help that player get past that point. But the other part of this is it can be relative to your own body type. I mean, there are certain athletes, Justin Verlander, who is a prime example. A few years back when he was with us, he underwent a core surgery. Took him a while to get back. He came back strong. Then, 2 years ago, the guy has Tommy John surgery. And what happens? At 40 years old, the guy comes back and he wins a Cy Young. Guys like that are sort of freaks of physical nature. It's one thing to have Tommy John surgery in your 20s. Here is a guy who had it in his late 30s and had an incredible recovery and bounce back. There are guys in the game who are made up differently and don't get hurt to the extent that other guys do.
Look at Nolan Ryan.
Perfect example. Perfect example. When you're drafting players, sometimes you do draft a player who may have some health issues in his history. So the organization has to make a decision as to whether or not they're willing to take on that risk. Where do they fall within that risk-reward ratio? There are some players that you draft who have no health history, perfectly healthy, nothing wrong. You get them and they break down. It's inexplicable. There are just some things you're not going to know when you get a player that has no health concerns in his history. it's unpredictable. And if there were a way that we could, we'd all be better off for it. But we just seem to have
Gotten a bad hand for a couple of years.
yeah, we did. We did.
What about, it seems like 6 innings seems to be the benchmark. And we know, we go back to the Cleveland pitchers, Early Wynn and Bob Lim and that whole crew. They were 9-inning pitchers. Are they not working hard enough on longevity? Are they working up to maximum effort at 6 innings? I'm sure that has to fit into analytics.
There is a truckload of data, if you will, that seems to lead organizations in the direction of limiting pitchers to number of pitches, innings. It's a debatable topic, to your point. You go back to Bob Gibson. If you ever go back and look at what Bob Gibson did in '68, I think that year he had one game of 7 innings, and the rest of his outings were 8 innings, 9 innings, 10 innings. I don't remember the number of complete games that he had, but it's beyond comprehension. When you compare something like that, which he did in '68, to what we do with pitchers now, it's completely different. I think the jury is still out relative to the theory that it's important to limit pitchers, and how that correlates to longevity. But I think that conversation will go on ad infinitum. It's
funny, Dan, when Dixie and I are watching a game, as soon as we get to the 6th inning, we say, "Oh no, not the 6th inning." so many times in the 6th inning, things go to hell in a handbasket.
That's why your bullpen is so important anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, in the old days, you'd have the 5th, 6th, 7th inning pitchers really were the kind of mediocre inning eaters. Then to get to the 8th and 9th, where now you're closers, it seems to be not the case anymore. I mean, You got guys that are destined to be premier 6th and 7th inning guys. And not your Scribonis. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, pretty accurate.
I mean, so that they really set up for guys that you're going to pitch. You'll be pitching the 6th inning for the rest of the year.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have specialists, and I think most clubs do set their pitching up that way. Yeah, that's a good assessment. Yeah. It's a different game. It just is.
Is there any limit to the analytics? I mean, the nuancing. I mean, does it go so far as this player struggles to hit or pitch when it's 40 degrees, when it's cold weather? And so when we're looking down to pick a reliever, maybe not that guy.
I don't know if evaluations get that granular. I only know that there is this trove of data and information that gets fed to the manager every day.
Is there somebody, talk about the manager, and the manager's got a million things he's looking at. He's got bench coaches, he's got other people. Does he actually have an analytics guy on the bench with him?
Yes.
The guy's got a laptop and he's kind of saying, who's the potential two pinch hitters, or who might, if we do X, Y may occur.
Yeah, most of our coaching staff now are analytics-driven coaches, and they're getting data from our analytics department, and that's used pre-game, in-game. But I say that, and of course, a manager is also going to make in-game decisions based on his gut and his instinct, and he should, but yes, there is data available in-game.
So I mean, I may be completely wrong. This is like Oz. You know, there's a guy behind the curtain, and a game is going on. A game is progressing. There's a guy at Comerica watching it who's got, you know, his fingers are dizzyingly going away, and he's sending data to somebody on the bench, some 25-year-old who's either been asked a question or is getting fed stuff about what they observe, what's going on during the course of the game. This guy is now coming in, the relief pitcher, and he's got X, Y, and Z, and certain degree. I mean, the old days of velocity kind of pitches, but this is the kind of stuff where, does that happen?
Well, I don't know what happens in game because I'm not there, but what I can tell you is that they have a pre-game meeting where they sit down and they discuss all of the pertinent data for that evening's game. And the individual that's in the dugout with the manager, of course, has access to that data throughout the course of the game. I don't necessarily think that in game something is being fed to the dugout to be used because the coach or coaches, they already have that data that they have access to, who will provide information to the manager as he needs it. It isn't as though you've got a group of folks in the analytics room who are constantly feeding data to the bench. I don't think that's the case, that what's happening.
Well, Hinch might be one of the best 2 or 3 managers in the game.
Mhm.
I mean, what a gold nugget. We coming off of the cheating scandal, we were able to, I mean, he and what a gentleman, what a
Yes.
super. He talks after the games, and you know, he'll admit a foible that occurred, and but he's a great manager.
Yeah, he is. And for his sake, for the organization's sake, I hope that AJ will have the talent at some point to be able to contend again, because we saw it back when Dave was here, what it was like to win in Detroit. Mm-hmm. We were drawing 3 million fans. Detroit was on fire for the ball club. The Tigers are such a beloved entity in that city that, and unfortunately we fell short. We didn't win a World Series. But when we get to that place again, it's really going to be a sight to see. I don't know if it's going to happen while I'm still here. I sure hope that it does, because I'd love nothing more than to be a part of a club, this club. I've won a World Series with the Marlins. I've been with the Tigers now coming up on 20 years. We came close to winning a World Series twice. I would love to leave my career with a World Series win with the Tigers. I don't know if that'll happen within a couple of years. That's impossible to tell. I do know this, that we are in very good hands with Scott Harris, with AJ, with Ryan, with the other guys. So we'll see what happens. I don't know at what point in time ownership will say it's time to increase our payroll. We did that last year. 2021, after the rough start, we had a really good finish to the year from May forward, and I think everybody thought that we were on the cusp of turning the corner to contend. So ownership said, let's go out, let's go for it. We signed Baez, we signed Rodriguez, and we saw what happened last year. So I don't think anybody wants to be in a position to judge prematurely when we think this team is going to be ready to contend again. I don't think we're far away. But whether that's 1 year, 2 years, I think it's coming sooner than later.
Danny, we all observed that Mike Ilitch was very much engaged and certainly had a close relationship with Dave way back when. I'm just very kind of in lockstep, and money seemed to be no object at that time. Now, do you get a sense, just relationship-wise, that Chris is close close to baseball operations, or is he hands-on, hands-off? What's your sense of his? I know he's dedicated to the Tigers, but what's that?
Oh, I think Chris pays very close attention to what goes on with the Tigers. You know, Chris has, I think the Ilitch family has upwards of a dozen different business entities, including the Red Wings. So when you're in his position, it's virtually impossible to devote all of your time and energy to one entity. But I know that he wants to win passionately. And he is very much in tune to what is going on with the day-to-day comings and goings of the ball club. And I think there will come a point in time when Scott will be able to say to Chris, I think we're at that point where if we look to increase payroll to maybe supplement 1 or 2 free agents, that can help us now turn the corner. I don't think we're going to make the mistake that we made last year. Scott was adamant when he came to the Tigers that you really have to stick to your guns when it comes to developing the core of your talent, which is through scouting and player development. And he'll know when it's time to go to ownership and say, okay, I think we're only short a couple of pieces here. And I know for a fact that winning in Detroit, the Tigers winning in Detroit, is very important to ownership. But you just can't go out and spend for the sake of spending, hoping that you're going to win. You have a business that you have to run. You look at, and I'll give you a couple of examples, and it doesn't mean that things aren't going to change, but here we are almost to June 1st. We are within percentage points of the Phillies and the Padres, 2 of the biggest spenders last offseason in free agency. And and I love Dave Dombrowski, you know that, and I want the Phillies to win. The Padres, I don't care if they win. I care if the Phillies win. But they've spent a boatload of money. And it just doesn't guarantee that you're going to win. We saw that happen to us years ago as well. So it's very complicated. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. You have to know when to pull that ripcord, that it's going to be time to supplement. We tried it last year, made that attempt, ownership made that commitment, and it backfired. And unfortunately, it cost Al his job. So there's never a guarantee to spending, no matter how much you're going to spend. So we've gone about this prudently, and I know diehard Tigers fans will say, no, it's taken too long. It's been 8 years, and that is a long time. We've had more go wrong for us than go right. And again, unfortunately, it cost Al his job, but hopefully we're in that position where the worst of it is behind us.
Dan, as a rabid Tiger fan. You can't keep changing the damn philosophy. You gotta ride the course. You said 8 years. Well, that philosophy has gone from here to there and here to there in 8 years, and that's a wrong way for any ball club. Eiserman's a great example. I think he's just a terrific. Boy, he's taking those Red Wings. He said, "This is the way you do it. This is the way you do it." And slowly, you don't see him waver. Now, Mr. Harris may well be doing the same thing.
He is. What happened? Our model didn't change until after Dave left. When Dave was running the Tigers, even though player development and scouting was important, it's important to every organization. The philosophy back then was, Mr. I's philosophy was, you can't win without stars. Spend, go get them. And he gave Dave what he needed to do to go out and get those players. And it cost us on the development side because we would, there were trades that had to take place to help us win now that cost us on the development side. Well, when Dave left, the philosophy, the model was, you have to build through development and scouting and supplement. And even though we placed an emphasis on development and scouting, you have to draft the right players in order to have an opportunity to develop players to get to the big league level. Our scouting director lost his job last year. He was a great guy. Were we not drafting the right players? Well, an argument could be made for that. So we've not wavered from player development and scouting since 2015. The issue has been, what are we getting? Are we getting players that we can develop into major league players or not? The last couple 3 years, it's been better. And I think we're continuing to get better. And I don't think Scott is going to waver from that position, that this is where you build a successful organization. And I don't think he'll waver. I think he'll stick to this plan. Like I said, I don't think we're far away. But what happens this year for the balance of the season may well determine how we approach next off season. In fact, how we perform this year up to the All-Star break or the trading deadline may well determine, are we going to fast forward that process? Are we going to be buyers? Are we going to be sellers? It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, because nobody is thinking right now, we're going to be this or that. Everybody wants to see how are the next couple of months going to play out. And because if we become sellers, we may very well have some valuable pieces. But if we become buyers, Scott is going to have some very strong convictions that this is the right time to be a buyer. If our division stays the way that it is, it's not a strong division. That also is going to come into play, because if you're playing in a weak division, like we are, and you get to the trading deadline, and the first place team is 5-10 games over 500, and we're sitting there a few games behind, you don't want to lull yourself into thinking, because we're only a few games out of first place, we're good enough where if we get to the postseason, we can have a deep run. You have to be careful not to over-evaluate. Some will say that's what happened to us after 21. We over-evaluated and thought we were closer than we were. So I think where we stand come August 1 is going to determine a lot about what'll happen to the Tigers for the remaining couple of months, and then what happens going into 2024.
Speaking about Tigers, I just want to introduce Kristen McMahon, who is a Tiger. Different type of Tiger.
kicking us
But she
off.
runs the Jackson Center, and she's here checking on us to make sure we behave. I would otherwise introduce everybody here, but
I appreciate that, thank you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
How about Austin Meadows? Will he be back this year? Where's he stand?
Well, as you know, he's on the injured list, and
It's mental issues, though?
he's had some mental health issues. I do not know specifically what they are. Obviously, that's
Yeah.
something that is
Secretive. I mean, it's, whatever it is, yeah.
but
I just miss being the guy I thought
Yeah.
we were gonna get,
very unfortunate
Paradise.
what happened, because when we obtained Austin, we all saw what he was doing with Tampa, and we thought he was going to be a
terrific.
guy to,
you all start here.
yeah. And the guy that we were giving up really
Paradise,
hadn't done anything for us.
yeah.
And then look what happens. He goes to Tampa, and the guy's hitting bombs everywhere.
I saw him in the area. He
Yeah.
played really well.
I don't know. I don't know if Austin is
Okay,
going to be
well, I
back
didn't
in.
mean
No,
to ask you a compliment.
no. That's, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think any of us know
Yeah, we hope he will.
the answer to that question. You just hope that
Yeah,
whatever it is that he's dealing with,
yeah,
that he gets healthy.
it's through it. Yeah,
Everybody remembers that Austin Meadows played here, Jamestown here,
yeah.
for the Pirates. He was their first round draft pick.
Yep.
Played here with a guy named Reese McGuire, who is now with the Red Sox catcher.
Yep.
Those are the two #1 draft picks. So a little connection.
Yeah,
We digress.
Yep.
I just, if I could, Dan, you talked about scouting. I've got really curiosity. The old days, and we all live it, where you'd go to a game and you'd see 3 or 4 guys with notepads, jugs gun, everything else, taking notes, with a stenographer type pad, and then going back and probably either typing them in. That was the old days. Nowadays, with so many cameras, so much watching, they could watch the game 6 ways to Sunday back in Detroit. Do they actually have many people that can actually sit in the stands?
Yes, every organization still has traditional scouts that are seeing games.
I see them in Lakeland
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah, and they're
The jug's gone, and they're taking notes.
Still exist.
it still
Yeah, and
exists.
They almost stand out. Just
Good
like a
to
big-
They have reports that they have to file. Of course, everything is inputted into a computer. So that part of the game still exists. On the development side, it's much easier now. For instance, we have roving instructors that go to each club during the season, either to work with the staff, work with the players. But even those guys now, even though they still travel, they're allowed to work from home, watch the games. There is so much you can get now from watching games on TV with the technology that we have available. They still have to go out and go to each club, work with the players, work with the staff, but there is a whole lot of benefit to be able to see games on a screen now as well. So that's something that has changed with us. It used to be, as soon as spring training ended, those guys were out, they were on the road from opening day until the end of the season, didn't get much of a break to go home. But now you can send those guys, you can send them home for a couple of weeks, and with a caveat though that when you get home, you're watching games on TV. So they get the best of both worlds.
What about the wild world of, you've got drafts, and you got collegians, and you have high schoolers. and it's just the ideas of field scouts, local scouts, giving you ideas. Is that all done by computer at this point? I mean, essentially until you know the 10, 20 people that are in the pool, then you go out and physically scout them. Is there that kind of, like the NFL draft, they have a little draft system, pooling system?
No, there are scouts out there seeing players. But it's that integration of being in the ballparks, seeing the players, talking to the families. But yes, the integration of technology has really changed the way scouting works anymore. There are some organizations, I want to say Houston might be one, that has done away with scouts by and large, and they still have some, and I don't know what their scouting staff looks like, but by and large they've gone to relying on data, technology, analytics. It's working for them. They win. They seem to win every year. They're a very good organization. We're not there yet. We still have guys that are out seeing teams, and we still have a pretty good sized scouting staff.
Dan,
But
would you say a good ball player does not slip through the cracks? That Joe Blow from Lowtown, Nebraska, his hometown said, man, he's a heck of a ball player. How come he didn't get drafted? Do we have those kids, or do we, because it's so inclusive with the computers and technology, are there kids that sometimes...
the good ones don't slip through the cracks. And everybody knows who the good players are. The difference is the scout who can sign a player that other clubs don't have the same opinion of, but this particular scout, a particular scout, has a belief that this guy's going to be a good player. I'll give you a good example. Kerry Carpenter, one of our guys, he's a 19th round pick. A few years ago, if anybody would have said Kerry Carpenter is going to be in the big leagues and he's going to play a lot, you would have probably scoffed at it. But we had a scout who signed him, and I don't remember who signed him, believed in this guy could be a pretty good major league player. And that doesn't often happen for a 19th round pick, but the good ones don't slip through the cracks. It's finding that guy, that diamond in the rough, so to speak. That's where a scout really earns his keep, when he finds that guy. And they're not easy to find, but they're out there. And sometimes you'll see a guy who maybe has marginal ability but plays with a ton of heart. And there are some guys who will say, I'd much rather have the guy that has marginal ability and a ton of heart than the guy who has a ton of ability and no heart, who may rest only on his physical skill set to become a better player. Those guys usually don't make it. If you get the guy who has a tremendous skill set with a great work ethic and a tremendous heart, obviously you've got a number one guy. But it's finding out who are the guys that have it here and don't have it here that really make the difference. Kerry Carpenter is one of those guys who, great makeup, great work ethic, works so hard, and now he's hurt right now, but we can see what he's done. And
Heart. How do you, in your analytics, where does that come into the play? Is that through an interview process? Is that through, you're talking about Kerry Carpenter, we need a guy with heart. How do you analyze that?
Analytics tells you nothing about a guy's heart and a
When does
guy's.
that come into the database? And
Yeah.
is this the scout report?
That's the scout.
Trust me?
That's the scout's report. I mean, it's up to the scout to find out as much as he can about the player, to find out about his upbringing, family background. And that's where the scout earns his keep, is to finding out about a player, his makeup. Trust me, we've had plenty of players who were talented, and you'd have scouts who were adamant, don't take this guy, bad makeup guy, doesn't work hard, not the kind of guy that we want in our organization. And when that guy says something like that, usually people who are making drafting decisions will listen very intently. Sometimes, and this happens all the time, an organization will take a chance thinking that we can change this guy. We can help him get better. Sometimes it happens, but oftentimes it doesn't.
George Carlo, good friend of ours, for years worked for the Tigers, and kind of that mind-body performance stuff, which seemed to be pretty much on the cutting edge. And we had events where we actually put Peter Sullivan through the paces, and it was remarkable. Remember that day when George did that to you?
Yeah, I can't remember what he did, but I remember.
Yeah, you were doing things that you weren't supposed to be doing. Right brain, left brain, all that stuff. That was,
Yeah, I remember.
that's going to come on. That's going to come out of the special. But point is, that was a few years ago. Is that part of what George's science, if you will? And I know Secrets of Champions is still out there and still very viable. But has that now become institutionalized? That type of kind of stuff.
Yeah, George. I mean, incredibly smart guy, and was ahead of his time when George came to the Tigers, and that was, oh gosh, I'm going to guess now 15 years ago. And it was fascinating stuff, and he became an integral part of the organization. And what we have today is the mental skills component. Every organization has a mental skills component. Whether you have one person, 2, 3, 4, I've heard there are a small number of organizations that have a mental skills coach at every level of the farm system. We don't, we're not there yet, but mental skills is an integral part of what we do. And George basically was the innovator, if you will, that introduced that concept to the Tigers. And at that time, of course, Dave bought in, and George became invaluable. And now it's the integration of mental skills plus performance science, that mind-body connection that has permeated throughout the game. And it's become really important. The one thing I think that an organization always has to be careful, though, is sometimes athletes can overthink things, like the rest of us. And there is so much out there now to help a player that it can become too much. And you have to have the right people in place. And and we've been fortunate to have that. We had George, and then we had a couple of other individuals, Brian Peterson, Spencer Wood. Brian and Spencer have left the organization, and now we have a new mental skills coordinator, came from a military background. So that's become really a critical piece of your organization, because players have to have that outlet to be able to work through mental health, mental skills, understanding more about themselves. I can remember, as long as I've been in the game, there was a time in the game where you'd tell players, hey, come on, suck it up. You're playing baseball. You should be better than that, right? Get over it. Figure it out. Well, that's not how...
Coach Hucker.
He didn't say it that nice.
That right foot, in the seat of the pants. But, how did George do with Dontrell Willis?
Well, but Dontrell was at the end of his career, and I think George put more into Dontrell than any other player.
I talked to George about it.
Yeah.
And he said, boy,
Yeah.
he said that was a tough nut.
That was a very tough one.
Yeah, he said that was a tough one.
But look what happened. Dontrell never was the pitcher again
No.
that he was when he was with Miami. So it wasn't anything that George did or didn't do. It was where Dontrell was at that stage of his career.
Dontrell's doing a nice job on television, though.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. Yeah. So
Where's George now?
Here.
Pardon?
Well, he's in Washington. He does. I don't want it on the camera, but what he's doing. But he's got a separate. He's doing a lot of stuff with the Department of
Okay.
Defense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't
But he's here.
He's here.
You'll see him at the ballpark.
Okay.
Did I say that ballpark? Did I say Jamestown?
I talked to him today, and
Yeah.
I don't see George there.
he wanted to get down here, but he was unable to make it. So we just talked a couple of hours ago. Yeah.
No, he's
Yeah.
still. He's good. Okay. Just out of curiosity, just to some player personnel stuff. As you look towards the trade, I know this is crystal ball stuff. Are there sacred cows on the Tigers? I mean, we know Cabrera's going to run out the skid, and nothing's going to happen. The Tiger organization is just going to deal with it. That type of thing. But as you look at your roster, you say there's no way these 3 or 4 guys are going to be. We got too much invested in them, and we think too much we'll get a return, that they're not sacred.
I don't know that any player is ever untouchable, because if an organization presents an offer to the general manager that you feel you can't turn away from that because you're going to get so much in return to help build your future, you pull the trigger. In our case, I mean, if there's one guy that I don't think is going anywhere,
A center fielder.
Riley Green. I think Riley is going to be the face of the organization for a long time. He's not only a special player, he's a special human being. And he just brings everything that you want in a player to the organization. And I'd be hard pressed to think that he's a guy that Scott would entertain moving at any point in time. He's special.
What about Torkelson? Because clearly they elevated him last year, almost too much spotlight on him. The guy tried like hell, but have they so much invested in him that it would take a lot?
I think so. I think sometimes we can look back in retrospect and maybe make an assumption that did we move him too soon to the big leagues? I mean, he was not only a number 1 pick, he was 1-1. And he got a lot of money. And he put so much pressure on himself. This is a guy who wants to succeed so badly. And I think he got thrust into a very difficult position. High expectations, big bonus baby, got off to a rough start, and the pressure kept building and building and building to where we had to move him back to AAA just to get him away from the pressure that he was putting himself under. But now this year, okay, we're starting to see bits and pieces of the Torkelson that we anticipate will be our first baseman for a long period of time. I don't, he's another guy, I just don't see Scott moving at any point in time. I think between Torque and Riley, those are guys that you want to build your future around. So I'd be hard pressed to think that those are guys that would be moved.
Anybody else would, I mean, aside from those two that?
No, I mean, we've got this talent coming up in the system, but I don't know that there's anybody in the system that would be a quote unquote untouchable. Last year's #1 pick,
Joe.
no, Young, Chase Young, who the infielder, Job was the year before. Job was going to be a good one, but he's dealing with a neck injury right now, so he hasn't pitched yet this year. Young from last year, Jung, it's spelled J-U-N-G. Some guys say Jung, some say Young. He's in his first year. I think he's hitting about 240 at West Michigan. That's not the kind of guy that you're going to include in a deal. And Job was just a young kid, drafted him out of high school, and he pitched well for us last year, is injured this year. He'll pitch at some point in time this year, but those are guys that you're going to keep in your system to be a part of that core once your club is ready to contend. Now, who knows how long that'll take. Jung is a college guy. He's going to be ready most likely before Job is. And by the time Job gets to the big leagues, I'll probably be sipping Mai Tais on the beach somewhere. But and while my wife is going, yes.
Danny,
We heard that, didn't we?
kind of a legacy question, perhaps. Again, 19 years Tigers. Aside from Dombrowski, because we know your close relationship with him, was there a person or two that during in your baseball, it could be a player, it could be somebody else, kind of helped shape you?
Jim Fanning.
Okay.
I can't even begin to describe what Jim meant to me. And I love looking back on my career. And when I started out here, of course, Jim was vice president of player development, and he was my first boss. Expos. Jim carried himself in a way that all I ever wanted to do was to be like Jim. He was the consummate professional. He led by example. He wasn't just the guy that you looked up to as a astute baseball executive. It was the man that he was. He was a guy that you not only wanted to emulate as a professional, but as a father figure. And Jim wasn't a dad at that stage of his life. But to this day, when I'm faced with a problem, a dilemma, a challenge, whatever it may be, I'll often think, how would Jim have handled this? What would Jim have done? And try to base my thought process, my problem-solving ability on what I thought Jim might have done in a given situation. So I owe so much to Jim, but I also spent over 25 years with Dave. And Dave wasn't just a boss to me for so many years. He was one of my closest friends. And to this day, we remain very close. And I learned an awful lot from Dave about how to run a ball club. And there was much that he taught me about the game, about the business of the game. So for me, really, those are the two guys. John McHale, I can't say enough about what Mr. McHale meant to me. Ultimately, it was Mr. McHale who provided me with the first opportunity to work at the major league level in Montreal. And the McHale family meant a great deal. But on a day-to-day interaction basis, I interacted with Jim much more than Mr. McHale. And of course, Dave. I worked for Dave for so many years. So really, those three individuals played a huge role in my development and the opportunities that I had throughout my career.
If Russ Dietrich were here, and he was at our Tarp Skunks meeting this morning, and the first thing out of his mouth when he said, hey, I'm going to try to see Danny, will he actually be here? Thinking you were on Zoom or something like that. No, he'll be here. And then he proceeded to tell his story of how he hired you to be part of the recreation. City of Jamestown, I'm an alum of that whole thing too, where they hired 20, 30 people, and they assigned you to the ballpark, and somehow Jim spotted you there and told Russ, you need to get him off that crew and onto something else. I don't think that was apocryphal. I think that was real. That was Russ's story this morning as a prelude to our meeting.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Russ. And I can remember that day, clear as a bell, going to Russ's office in City Hall and sitting down with him and telling him how much I wanted to be in baseball, and I would do anything that I needed to do, whatever he had for me. I'd be thrilled to do it. I wanted to work at the ballpark, and of course Russ was gracious enough to give me a job working as the groundskeeper, and during that '79 season, and Tom Kassler and I worked together that summer. But while people like Jim and Mr. McHale and Dave helped to shape my career, it was Russ. If it wasn't for Russ, I probably don't have an opportunity to work for Jim and Dave and Mr. McHale. So yes, I owe an awful lot to Russ and love him dearly. And I'm sorry that he's not here today. I would have loved to have seen him.
Well, he thought he would be. I know we don't want to take up all of your time. We do, but I know that at some point your wife's going to say, "Come on." You're not giving him the look.
No.
He's okay.
I usually
There was
say
something,
yes.
there was a look about the beach.
Let's go now.
But I didn't say Italy, not the beach. I said Italy. That was my add-on.
Jordan, let's go. I want to make sure everybody's got questions. I don't want to end this prematurely. But Randy, any?
No, I'm just listening.
Good. Well, you're not a tiger.
Taking it off.
We want you in here. Boyd, do you have anything you want to?
No, I'm good. This is good.
Okay. I don't want to make sure we have question time. I know, Wally, you got a question, Russ?
No, I
Yeah.
asked him.
How many at-bats does Cabrera have to have this year to make sure he has a 300 batting average for his career?
Do you know what?
I mean,
He could go 0 for the rest of his career,
but
and he'll finish as a career 300 hitter.
yeah. Because I was so sad when Al Kaline ended up 297 because
And 399 home runs.
Yeah, I
Right.
know. It was just, you want that over that hurdle
Yeah.
at the end. Just like you want to build this dormitory
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think it was last night, but it could have been the night before.
Yeah.
Cabrera, the first time up, looked terrible. Next time up, I think it was hit a hard ground ball to third. The next time up, single, right into left field. Just like he learned from those
First two at bats.
First two at bats.
Yeah.
Because first time at bat, it was like a little leaguer got up. He was awful.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever touched the ball in those, but by the third time at bat,
It's hard. I think every one of us, not just with the Tigers, but anybody who is really a fan of the game, it's hard to watch in the sense that this is his last year.
Yeah.
You really want to see him go out on a strong note, have a good year. Maybe not necessarily hit 300, but maybe hit 270, 280, maybe hit 12, 15 home runs. But it doesn't look like it's going to
He doesn't
happen.
have any legs. Everything.
It's his legs.
His arms, and he's.
It's his legs, his knees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'm glad to see the send-off that he's getting when the club is going around to the various ballparks and
Giving them gifts and
Like
yes,
that rocking chair scene. Did you see?
nice.
yes, yeah. So,
Speaking of which, Cabrera history, the players are watching an icon, if you will. Do players, as you go see the development, do they appreciate history of baseball? And it sounds like a dumb question because they're in it, they're part of it. But just kind of the legacy of it all. When you walk through your complex at Lakeland, you see the Mickey Cochrans, you see that Greenberg, you see the Newhouses, all that K-line stuff, but some of these guys just would have no clue because they've just been born 20 years ago. Is there a sense of that?
I think this generation, and I'm not speaking specifically of players in our organization. I think this is a statement in general. I just don't know that the athletes today really have that sense of history. And I don't know what it is. I know when I was growing up, we would immerse ourselves in reading stories, stats. It was almost an obsession as kids when we were growing up.
You had those baseball cards, 1,000 of them. So it took you through so many
But
eras.
today, I just don't, and I don't, again, it's not a blanket statement, but I just don't know that, and it's not just baseball, that athletes today really have that sense of history in the organization that they're working for. Now, when Al was alive, the wonderful thing that would happen with Al Kaline, he was very present. And
He was very what?
present.
Present.
So
Okay.
he was at spring training.
Came to all the games.
He would get in uniform. He'd be in the clubhouse talking to players. Well, if you didn't know who Al Kaline was, shame on you, because Al made himself available to all the young guys. Much in the same way today, Alan Trammell works for the ball club, and by his own admission, he's a baseball rat. I mean, he is in the ballparks. He is working with guys. Players in our organization know who Alan Trammell is because Tram makes himself available to everybody. But if Tram wasn't in the role that he's in, if he was not working for the Tigers, or if he was not working in baseball and he was just somebody out there, I'm not sure how many guys would know who Tram is. So it's only by their nature of being involved with the ball club that players understand their particular contribution to the Tigers in history. But it is sad in a lot of ways that you just don't see players today who really understand history and understand who the players were that made such significant contributions to the organization that they play in. And that's not a criticism. It's just, I don't think history becomes a part of their mindset. They're dealing with the present, getting better as a ball player, getting to the big leagues. It's just a different generation, I think. That's all.
But it's interesting, here we are, we're guys, and we can recite a lot of names of famous Tiger players that have been part of it. And likewise, spending a lot of time in Detroit myself these days, there's a mindset, it really is, of the nostalgia. They could recite everything about 1968. 1984 is like the golden year. And they know the players, and they treat them iconically. But the players don't seem, it's like almost a disconnect. I don't mean that's a negative, but it's a disconnect. It's like if you could have somebody throw out the first pitch as a 1984 player, or Mickey Loach or something, whatever. It just is not, it's different. It's different. It's like you want to say, here's a pack of baseball cards, read it, please.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't interject, but this is just what I have observed, what you're talking about. I don't know what's going to happen to the building where all the players eat now. Because Greg, I don't know if you've been in there, but there's these huge, like, picnic-sized tables. And all the young players come in and eat all the meals there. And under the surface, a clear surface like this, it's covered with baseball cards. As far back as, you could think.
Decades.
Decades. Decades. And then when we did the big renovation down there, you put up these, I guess it was your idea, from what I remember, these big poster size of, Al and Willie and all these guys all along the wall. I wonder how much the players actually
I don't know. That's a good.
Down, look up and think.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I've seen all those. I took pictures of everything.
That's a good question. Yeah. So what she's talking about in the new building that we have, Greg has seen it. You've seen it on the first floor, where the Major League clubhouse is. There is a wall, and the wall is probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess 40 yards long, maybe. And so when we constructed this building, they asked me to basically brand it, do something with it, figure it out. So I created this wall of history, going back to when the Tigers were founded over 100 years ago, and it ends at 2013 because that was the last big year that the Tigers had. And there's a narrative with each image, and it has images of all of the Tiger greats, and it really is, it's a good history lesson. But how many players pay attention to that? I really don't know. But
They have to walk by it. All the time.
Oh yeah, they walk by it every day.
Yeah, and they're sitting to eat on top of the
Yeah,
cars.
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
Do they look?
I don't know.
We don't know it.
Trying to do, but the other thing we've tried to do also in spring training, we'll have educational meetings, and where either somebody like Tram will speak to the players or Jim Leland will speak to the players, and you try to introduce and educate history of the organization, because you do want them to know how incredibly rich the history of the Tigers is and what the Tigers have meant to Detroit, and how much they grasp or retain. I don't know. I really don't know.
I just, think about, Yankee players live and die for the thrill of being in the pinstripes. They've created that corporate image. And it's just the way it is. You talk to the young Yankee, they just, to have the pinstripes. So therefore you want to play for the team because of the legacy. I just wonder, that may be lost on most other teams, and wonder if that's lost on the Tigers.
That
Yeah.
old English D is not lost.
Right. Right.
And I'll tell you, outside of the NY, that old English D,
Yeah,
Yeah.
big.
it's, if it's not the best logo in base, and I know you're going to say, well, you work for the Tigers, of course you're going to say that. But that old English D is pretty special.
One of the announcers the other night, when they mentioned, not from the Tigers, that old English D.
Yeah,
And he said, that's really a neat uniform with that old English D.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And I know, I've seen various articles published about the best looking uniform, the best logo in the game. And the Tigers always have been in the top 3, always. So it is a classic, it really is. And hopefully they never change it. There was a period of time years ago where they tried to introduce that logo with the tiger coming through the D. But, and there was nothing wrong with that other than that's not the old English D as we know it.
Simple D.
Yeah, yeah, like the D on the hat.
Yeah.
Remember, we also fired Ernie Harwell for a year or two.
Oh.
Remember that?
Yeah, but Bo didn't last very long in this role,
No.
did he?
No, that didn't last.
Yeah.
I saw Ernie at Tiger Stadium down in Lakeland, and I said, they're going to bring you back. Caught him on the steps. And nah, he said, that's never going to happen. I said, oh yes it is. And it was.
And it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, that's one of those things I don't think anybody will ever be able to understand. Why would you
he was that common.
let a guy like that go, right?
Yeah, the Pirates went through that too. They fired Bob Prince.
Oh yeah, right?
Same thing, what, the gunner? How could you do that? And then they brought her back
Yeah.
after they got blasted.
Yeah. And we do, you miss those guys. You miss guys like Prince and Ernie, and Dan Dickerson does, I think, a phenomenal job for the Tigers. But me growing up as a huge Yankee fan, I miss Scooter. I miss Frank Messer and Bill White. I mean, I loved listening to those guys. I thought they were the greatest. But that element seems to be, I don't know, missing from the game today. I think maybe because there are so many games on TV now. I mean, you can see any game, any day on TV. And so there's this huge flood of baseball announcers now that in the past, when TV was limited, you only had radio guys, and the best announcers ever to come through the game, in my opinion, were the guys that were doing that work years and years ago. But I think Dan Dickerson is on his way to becoming one of the greats as well. I love Dan. I think he does a marvelous job.
Here's what I miss. There's something I really miss these meetings here, is having the late Gordy Black. He's not here.
We all miss him.
Generally. But I tell you what I really miss. Gordy would always jump in, and it's on every film. He goes, what's wrong with Jim Price? How come they still keep him? He hated Jim Price as an announcer.
I don't know why.
I
do too.
That was Gordy's mantra.
Yeah.
I said a
Speaking.
lot of Gordy yesterday. We have a plaque up at the Moonbrook Starters Hut in his honor.
Oh, good.
And every time I tee off, I go say hi to Gordy and Riggs Reynolds. I don't know if he was a Detroit fan.
Speaking of which, how many guys, when we started doing this years ago, how many guys have we lost? Gordy has passed away.
Al Short.
Al Short. Kenny
My
Martin.
dad.
Yep.
Your dad.
Gordy Martin. Gordon. Martin.
Gordy and Ken.
Gordy Ken,
Yeah.
Martin. Yeah.
Did Gordy pass away?
Yep.
Oh, he
Yeah.
died in a car crash.
No, Gordy Black, but Gordon, Martin, Kenny Martin's brother.
Oh,
Yes.
See, Randy will call me every February, and he wants to come to see the Tigers, and he wants to come to see the Yankees, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And of course, Randy knows he's getting my tickets. So when you're watching the Tigers and the Yankees in Lakeland in spring training, You're rooting for the Tigers.
And I'm sitting next to Jim Leland.
That's right. That's right.
I'm next to him every year, Dad, because he sits in the seat
Yeah.
next to you.
Yeah.
Which is, we're still hoping, against hope, that someday he'll be on special assignment. We hear about it. He's in Erie. Last time we tried to get him here, that was the requirement. He goes, if I'm in Erie, special assignment, and can sneak up like you today, he would consider that.
Boy, I'll tell you what, if that ever happened, you'd be in here all day long. I mean, because he's such a great storyteller. And he's one of those guys where when Jim starts talking, you want to listen to every word that's rolling off of his tongue because he has such great stories. And it's how he tells the story that makes it all the more enjoyable.
Well, he's got good stories about Bemis Point. And we have a diary, by the way, of George Gebelsch, who was his roommate here in Jamestown, about the two of them together. So we have conversation pieces.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And he was, fortunately, he's still with us, thankfully so. And he was in Lakeland for all of spring training this year. And
What's his role?
He's a special assistant, so Scott may call him up and say, Jim, I need you to get over to Toledo and I need you to watch so-and-so or so-and-so, or just go watch the Toledo club and let me know what you think. And he's the guy that provides invaluable feedback and evaluation to the general manager. So, and Jim loves his role. It's too bad we won't ever see him manage again because he was fun to watch as a manager. But I just am thankful that he's still with the Tigers.
And Jim Leland, the seventh inning, it was during the seventh inning, when they sing the song, God Bless America. So Leland's out there, they call the third strike, it's the conclusion of the top of the seventh. Or something happens, and he's, a strike that wasn't called, and he's just out there railing on the umpire. I mean, it's in your face, they're showing it, all of a sudden the song starts, God Bless America. So he just turns next to the umpire, puts his hat over his chest, and they play God Bless America. They concludes, puts his hat on, he goes, he just went, his brain paused for the song, and then he went crazy again. And that was the highlight of watch Jim Leland.
And during the song, he's thinking about what he's going to tell the umpire as soon as the song ends.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Danny, what's the question you expected? You're driving up there with your arm candy, and you're thinking about this, and guys Wally's going to ask you a question. What's the question we haven't asked you?
I don't know. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
But Dixie told me don't ask Dan anything that would embarrass him in front of him. So she gave me the last word. So I behaved myself.
No, I think we've covered everything. It's great to be able to be here talking about the Tigers, especially at a time when things are better with the Tigers.
But
right?
we are in a big change right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch him, Scope is almost that's against left-handers, and he's brilliant. Jesus, against right-handers, he's brutal. Maton, he went through.
He had a great spring too.
And now all of a sudden, he's back. And I wondered, did he work with the hitting coaches? Did they somehow get him back in that swing? He has a great eye at the plate.
Yeah.
Draws a lot of walks. But now he was swinging through the fastballs.
Yeah.
But now he's back hitting the ball quite well.
Yeah.
And I think about, I wonder, how did he get through that? And were they working with him hard every day and in the batting cage and trying to straighten them out? Or
well, you're always working with players, and how they handle going through a slump for me, really is a determining factor on how they'll be able to pull out of a slump. And you have to be able to separate offense from defense. The good players are able to do that. But if you're not a grinder, if you're not mentally tough, and you're going through a bad slump, boy, it can go on for a long, long time. But he's been a good addition to the club. Verling's been a good addition to the club. I mean, Scott's made some good moves during the off season, and it's good to see that. We went through a lot last year with Rodriguez, and of course Al took a lot of heat because of what was happening with Rodriguez, but he has shown himself to be the pitcher that we all thought he was going to be when we signed him. So we're young, we have to stay healthy, we have to keep developing the young guys. Hopefully we get that group of pitchers back healthy at some point. Probably won't be this year. Manning.
Scooble is awfully close.
I don't know how close Scooby's going to be. He may be a while. Mize isn't probably going to pitch this year. I think Manning may. Brisky probably won't pitch this year. Again, those are guys that hopefully will look to have at full strength for next year.
In 6 weeks, Scooble will be on the mound for us.
I hope you're right.
I think so.
Okay.
Because, I see he was throwing, not batting practice, but he was throwing to batters.
Yeah.
And they said, boy, his breaking ball was
You just have to hope for no setbacks.
Right.
That's all. That's the thing that you worry about. So, but brighter days are coming.
Yep.
They certainly are.
Grass always looks greener. Yeah.
No, good things are coming. They really are. I believe that in my heart. I really do.
I was telling Greg when I came in 1949, it was the first time I listened to a game. Helmut Newhouser was playing, and it was on a big old radio. Listening to WJR, you could only get them at night.
Yeah.
And that was the first when I started to follow the Tigers. And I was 9 years old then. And boy, there have been a few bright spots in those. God, I don't know how many years is that? 60, 80 years? Not 75 years. But once you're a Tiger fan, you're always a Tiger fan.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because once in a blue moon, somebody who knows me really well from home will say, "Aren't you still a Yankee fan?" Because I was a fanatic. I mean, I lived and died with the Yankees, and of course, no, I'm not a Yankee fan. They don't sign my paycheck. Yeah. Maybe when I retire, I might become a Yankee fan, but I'm sure when I retire, I'm still going to be pulling hard for the Tigers.
I was a Yankee fan when not the Yankees, the Tiger fan, when I was a little kid down there at the stadium when they used to play down there.
Yep.
That's how long I was a fan. I just went through it. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I saw Hal Newhouser down there and Virgil Truck, all those guys when they came in for that All-Star game.
And you probably saw Mike Ilitch play
Yeah.
at College Stadium. Well, what was,
The ultimate baseball card.
right? It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It's the Jamestown Falcons Mike Ilitch baseball card, which I don't know if you know the story, but the Fenton had it a set of 1952 cards, and Mike was in it. And I got it, digitized it, put the Falcon printing, blew them up, and had the cards made of that. And so I was at a Tigers game, and I didn't see him. I saw Dave. So I gave him one to Dave, and one for Dave to give to Mr. Ilitch of the card. And Dave immediately went and gave it to Mr. Ilitch in his box. And because I know the next day, Mrs. Ilitch, where did you get it? I want more. And that found its way to Amy, at the Assistant General Counsel's office, saying, was it your dad that got all that stuff? And subsequently, whenever they did documentaries on Mike Ilitch after he passed away, the pivotal piece was that crazy baseball card that was in the Fenton History Center in 1952. You know, it was just, and Mrs. Ilitch went nuts. She just thought it was the greatest thing.
Yeah, it was very cool. Very
I sat
cool.
beside a fellow in the parking lot down Lakeland. He's passed away now, and always had Cadillacs, big Cadillacs, and he said, we used to have a motorhome, and we'd park over there, and pretty soon Mike Ilitch would come over and rap on the door, got any cold beer in there? And out the stairs would go, and he'd tip a few. And the guy said, boy, it was so meaningful to him. And he's that damn place going to hell now. It's nothing like it. Boy, when Mr. Ilitch used to come in.